Hello, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story. So let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Part 1. Hiding. Lucas Kane woke up before dawn when the sky over Haven Pines was still tinged with the pale gray of fog. At 35, he was no longer the man who once struck fear into the entire underworld, a notorious kingpin, second to none but above all, with an iron fist, who had orchestrated multi-million-dollar deals amid the smoke of gunpowder and cold, piercing gazes. Now he was merely a silent figure in an old wooden cabin perched precariously on the edge of Pine Hollow Lake, a remote spot in the small town of Haven Pines, Oregon. The cabin had nothing remarkable about it: weathered wooden walls, a mossy-stained tiled roof, and a small porch overlooking the calm water. But to Lucas, it was everything: a place to escape, to forget the years of blood and fire that had stained his life black. He stepped onto the porch in worn-out boots, a tattered flannel jacket hanging loosely over his shoulders. The scruffy beard he kept wasn't just to ward off Oregon's chill, it was a mask, concealing the face that once made enemies cower in terror. Lucas lived discreetly, almost invisibly. He only left the house in the early morning, while the town still slept, to fish from a small wooden boat or visit the general store for essentials: bread, milk, and sometimes a cheap bottle of whiskey to soothe the long, sleepless nights. He spoke to no one, didn't smile, didn't let anyone remember him. To the people of Haven Pines, he was just the guy by the lake, a stranger no one bothered to question. Haven Pines was a small, peaceful town, like something out of an old postcard. Dirt roads were blanketed with dry pine needles fallen from towering trees. The gentle lapping of the lake against the shore sounded like a soothing lullaby, and the air carried the faint scent of burning wood from the fireplaces of quaint little homes. The townsfolk lived slowly, friendly but not overly curious, a quality Lucas valued more than anything. They held gatherings in the town square on weekends where children ran around and adults chatted about crops or the weather. Lucas never went. He preferred the darkness of his wooden cabin to the light of unfamiliar smiles. But that morning, as Lucas sat on the rickety armchair on the porch, holding a mug of thick black coffee, an unexpected detail shattered his stillness. A black car, not a delivery truck or a familiar local vehicle, glided past the narrow path leading to the lake. It moved slowly, almost deliberately, its headlights sweeping across the water before disappearing behind the pine trees. Lucas frowned, his hand instinctively tightening around the dagger hidden in his jacket pocket, a habit from his days of living in danger. His heart beat a little faster, though his mind tried to calm it. "Just a trick of the mind," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse from disuse, but his eyes stayed fixed on the road where the car had vanished. He stood up, stepped inside, and shut the wooden door with a sharp click. The interior was sparse to the point of austerity: a single bed pushed against the wall, a small scratched wooden table, and a shelf with a few cheap novels he'd picked up from a secondhand store. No TV, no radio, nothing to connect him to the outside world. Lucas wanted it that way, a place to sever all ties to his past. But that black car, fleeting as it was, planted a seed of doubt in his chest. Had they found him? The old enemies who had sworn to make him pay with his blood? He sat at the table, his hand trembling slightly as he poured more coffee. He didn't want to think about it, but memories flooded back like an unstoppable tide. He recalled the long nights in the underground bunker in Chicago, where he ran a transnational smuggling network. He remembered the sound of gunfire, the sharp sting of gunpowder, and the eyes of traitors he'd once called brothers. He remembered the last time he nearly died, a bullet through his chest, leaving a long scar as a reminder that he'd never truly escape. After that night, Lucas had left it all behind: the money, the power, the reputation. He disappeared and fled to Haven Pines, hoping to live as an ordinary man. He stood again, walking to the sink to calm his mind by washing the old mug. Through the small window, he saw the lake shimmering under the first light of morning. A lone duck glided silently across, leaving faint ripples. The sight usually steadied him, but today, it couldn't erase the unease. Lucas wondered if he was truly safe, or if he was just living in a fragile illusion. At noon, he decided to go fishing on the lake, a routine that kept his mind sharp. He put on his jacket, pulled his cap low over half his face, and stepped onto the small wooden boat tied to the shore. The cold wind blew through, carrying the damp scent of earth and pine. Lucas cast his line, eyes fixed on the water, but his thoughts drifted to the past. He remembered his last meeting with Vincent, his right-hand man, who had warned, "If you leave, they won't forgive you. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." Lucas had smirked, thinking he was clever enough to vanish completely. But now that black car made him doubt himself. As the sun rose higher, Lucas reeled in his line, catching only a small fish that he released back into the lake. He didn't need the fish. He just needed a reason to get out, to prove he still controlled this life. On his way back, he passed the trail into town, where small wooden houses began to light up. A few locals waved from afar, but Lucas only nodded, not stopping. He didn't want them to remember his face, didn't want anyone entering his world. Back at the cabin, he set the fishing rod in the corner, shed his jacket, and stepped into the small bathroom. Standing before the cloudy mirror, he unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the long scar running down his chest, a deep, jagged mark, proof of the years he'd lived beyond the law. He touched it, feeling the rough skin under his fingertips. That night, he'd lost everything: blood, trust, and a part of himself. But he'd survived, and he vowed not to let the past drag him back. Lucas put his shirt back on and stepped onto the porch as dusk began to fall. The lake now glowed a brilliant orange, reflecting the dark pine ridges. He sat down, a cold beer in hand, staring into the distance. The black car might have been a random passerby, but his instincts, the ones that had saved him countless times, told him it wasn't a coincidence. He took a sip, the bitterness sliding down his throat like a warning. "They won't find me," he told himself, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. But deep down, he knew peace was never permanent, not for someone like him. Part 2. A Fateful Encounter. Rain began to fall as Lucas Kane stepped out of the wooden cabin by Pine Hollow Lake. Small droplets slipped through the pine canopy, tapping a steady rhythm on the brim of the cap he pulled low over his face. He hadn't planned to go far today, just a short trip to the general store to buy more coffee and a few loaves of bread. But as the rain grew heavier and the cold wind cut through his thin flannel jacket, Lucas decided to seek shelter. He scanned the pine needle-covered dirt road of Haven Pines, his gaze settling on a small wooden sign hanging in front of the Pine Brew coffee shop, the only nearby place still lit up. Lucas pushed the door open, the faint jingle of a bell announcing his arrival. Inside, the warmth stood in stark contrast to the chill outside. The aroma of roasted coffee filled his nostrils, mingling with the scent of burning wood from a small fireplace in the corner. Round wooden tables were neatly arranged, a few paintings of lake scenes hung on the walls, and a modest bookshelf brimmed with old novels. Behind the counter, a young woman was wiping glasses. Sophia Miller, 28, the owner of this coffee shop. She had naturally tousled brown hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, sparkling blue eyes like the lake at dawn, and a warm smile that could melt anyone, even someone like Lucas. Sophia looked up, her smile widening when she saw him. "Hiding from the rain?" she asked, her voice gentle but radiant. Lucas nodded without replying, pulling his cap lower to shield his wary eyes. He chose a table near the window, sat down and stared out at the rain pelting the glass. He didn't want to talk, didn't want to be noticed, just needed a quiet corner until the storm passed. But Sophia, with her cheerful and curious nature, wasn't about to let him fade into the shadows so easily. She walked over, setting a mug of warm water in front of him without asking. "Consider it a welcome gift for a new customer," she said, winking. Lucas glanced at the water, then at her, replying in a hoarse voice, "I don't drink water." Sophia laughed, unfazed. "Then let me make you a coffee on the house. Rain like this without something warm in your hands is just too dreary." Lucas started to refuse, but before he could get the words out, a loud crash echoed from the corner of the shop. Three drunken men, their jackets soaked through, were causing a ruckus at a table near the fireplace. One knocked over a chair, the wood clattering to the floor with a thud, while another guffawed, waving a beer bottle around. Sophia frowned, stepping forward with a calm but firm voice. Gentlemen, please sit down or leave. I don't want trouble here. But the group didn't listen. The tallest one, his face flushed red from alcohol, grabbed Sophia's arm, slurring, "Why so serious? Get us more beer." Lucas clenched his fists under the table, his eyes narrowing. He didn't want to get involved. He'd sworn to steer clear of trouble, to live invisibly. But as Sophia yanked her arm free and the man advanced closer, he couldn't stay seated. He rose, approaching with a slow, powerful stride, like a predator restraining its strength. "Let her go," he said, his voice low but icy. The drunks turned, ready to mock him, but Lucas's piercing gaze made them falter. The tall one snorted, lunging with a clumsy punch. Lucas sidestepped swiftly, then locked the man's neck with his left arm, slamming him onto the table with just enough force to subdue him without making a scene. The other two moved to jump in, but he fixed them with a stare, his voice steady. "Get out! Now!" The calm authority in his demeanor, paired with his discreet strength, sent all three stumbling to their feet, muttering curses as they staggered out. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving the coffee shop in silence. Sophia stood there, eyes wide, a mix of surprise and gratitude on her face. She brushed her hair back, regaining her composure. Thank you. I didn't expect you to be that strong." Lucas didn't reply, heading back to his table, intent on leaving immediately. But Sophia hurried over, placing a hand on the counter to block his path. "Wait, at least let me treat you to a coffee, okay? I owe you." Lucas shook his head, his voice gruff. "No need." But she wouldn't relent. "Then at least tell me your name. I'm Sophia, the owner here." He hesitated, his eyes tracing her radiant face. "Lucas," he said curtly, then pulled his cap down and stepped out into the rain before she could say more. Sophia watched him disappear into the downpour, her gaze full of questions. "Lucas," she murmured as if the name were a puzzle to solve. The man who just saved her wasn't just strong. He carried a mystery that she couldn't stop thinking about. He lived alone by the lake, spoke little, yet his actions said more than words ever could. A few days later, they crossed paths again by chance. Sophia was struggling with a jammed glass door outside the shop, gripping a screwdriver but unable to budge it. The rain had stopped, but the cold wind still tousled her hair. Lucas passed by, returning from the general store with a paper bag of bread and coffee. He meant to ignore her, but when he saw her nearly drop the screwdriver, he paused. "Need help?" he asked, his tone flat, as if he didn't care much either way. Sophia looked up, her face lighting up when she recognized him. "Lucas! Oh, perfect timing. This door's been stuck for a week. I'm totally stumped." He set his bag down, took the screwdriver from her without a word, and with a few quick, precise movements, he removed the hinge, adjusted the frame, and reattached it as if nothing had happened. Sophia watched, hands on hips, her eyes sparkling with interest. "You're a real silent hero, huh? Living alone by the lake with skills like that. I bet you're more than just a fisherman." Lucas handed back the screwdriver, shrugging. "It's nothing." He turned to leave, but Sophia piped up. "Hold on. Let me treat you to coffee again. This time, no excuses." She pulled out a chair, practically forcing him to sit. Lucas sighed but relented, if only to stop her persistence. Sophia brewed a black coffee, setting it before him with a beaming smile. "Now we're even. You've saved me twice already." They sat there in the shop's cozy warmth. Sophia began talking about Pine Brew, the coffee shop she'd opened 3 years ago, hoping to create a warm spot for the town. "I love seeing people smile, hearing their stories. One day, old Mrs. Mary told me about her missing cat. Another day, Mr. Tom bragged about his new grandkid. It's small stuff, but it makes me happy." Lucas listened, saying little, nodding occasionally, but his eyes, though he tried to hide it, softened as she spoke. There was something about Sophia, her sincerity, her warmth, that felt foreign to him, like a ray of light piercing the dark corners of his heart. When the coffee was gone, Lucas stood. "Thanks," he said, his voice carrying a hint of warmth for the first time. Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "Who are you, so strong yet living alone by the lake?" she asked, echoing her question from their first meeting. Lucas paused, his gaze flickering. Just someone who likes quiet, he replied, stepping out before she could hold him back. Sophia watched him go, still holding his empty mug. This man, Lucas, was unlike anyone she'd met in Haven Pines. He appeared like a gust of wind, helped her, then vanished, leaving her with a curiosity she couldn't shake. She resolved to learn more about him, not just out of gratitude, but for something she couldn't yet name. Part 3. Days of Closeness. One early autumn morning, as pale golden sunlight filtered through the pine canopy and spilled onto the dirt road of Haven Pines, Sophia Miller stood in front of Pine Brew Coffee Shop, hands on her hips, staring intently at the wall behind the counter. The wooden surface had faded, marred by stains from days of leaking rain, and she decided it was time for an upgrade. She wanted to repaint the wall and add a small bookshelf in the reading corner so customers could sip coffee while relaxing with a novel. But Sophia knew she couldn't do it alone. She was clumsy with anything requiring strength, and a screwdriver had already proven to be her greatest challenge. Lucas Kane passed by the shop on his way back from the lake, carrying a fishing rod and a small bag of fish he'd just caught. He intended to walk straight past without glancing sideways, but Sophia spotted him from afar. "Lucas!" she called out, her voice as radiant as the morning sun. He stopped, turned around and frowned as she waved enthusiastically. "I need some help here. Are you free?" Lucas sighed, his eyes flickering with reluctance. "Help with what?" he asked, his tone flat, as if eager to end the conversation quickly. Sophia grinned broadly, pulling him toward the wall. "I want to repaint this spot and build a little bookshelf too. You're so handy. Last time you fixed the glass door in no time. Help me out, and I'll pay you with free coffee for a month." Lucas looked at her, then at the wall, his hand unconsciously tightening around the fishing rod. He didn't want to get too involved. The closer he got to someone, the easier it was for them to ask questions about him. But Sophia's sparkling eyes and the sincerity in her every word made it impossible to refuse outright. "1 week," he replied curtly. "No more." Sophia clapped her hands, bouncing like a child. "Fantastic. Let's start today, okay?" That afternoon, Lucas showed up at Pine Brew with an old toolbox and a few cans of paint Sophia had bought from the town store. He wore a rolled-up shirt, his cap pulled low as usual, and began working without much talk. Sophia bustled around him, helping and chatting away. "What color do you like?" "I picked a light green, but if you prefer something else, just say so." Lucas shrugged. Any color's fine, and kept brushing paint onto the wall in neat, even strokes. His silence didn't deter Sophia. She started talking about the shop, her regular customers, and the first time she brewed coffee so badly it filled the house with a burnt smell. Lucas didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth twitched upward, a rare smile he didn't notice. Then an unexpected moment broke the rhythm. While Lucas stood on a ladder painting the upper section, he accidentally tipped over a small can of paint. A splash of light green landed squarely on Sophia's white shirt. She yelped, half surprised, half amused, staring as the stain spread. Lucas turned, eyes widening, looking flustered for the first time. "Sorry," he said quickly, stepping down to grab a rag for her. But Sophia burst into laughter, grabbed a paintbrush still wet with color, and swiped a long streak across his cheek before he could react. "Now we're even," she declared, laughing so hard tears rolled down her face. Lucas stood there, paint on his face, staring at her with a mix of surprise and confusion. Then he chuckled, a hoarse, brief sound, but enough to crack the cold shell he always wore. "You're trouble," he muttered, wiping the paint off with his hand. Sophia shrugged. "But it's fun, right?" They resumed working, but the air felt lighter now, as if that splash of paint had erased part of the invisible barrier between them. Over the next few days, Lucas came to the shop more often. He finished the wall, then started on the bookshelf, a task requiring precision that he handled with remarkable skill. Sophia stayed close, assisting and talking. She told him about the books she loved, from Jane Austen's romantic novels to Jack London's adventure tales. "Do you read?" she asked, handing him a wooden plank. Lucas nodded. "Yeah, when I was a kid." He didn't elaborate, but his eyes dimmed slightly as he recalled his childhood. Those rare, peaceful days before life shoved him into darkness. Sophia didn't press him, but she shared more about herself. She spoke of her dream to open Pine Brew, how she'd left the city for a quieter place. I wanted this to be somewhere people feel at home. Some days, Mrs. Mary sits here all day just reading the paper. Other days, kids run in begging for cookies. It's small, but it's enough for me. Lucas listened, hammering nails into the shelf with steady hands. He said nothing, but inside her warmth felt like a strange breeze stirring the cold, locked corners of his heart he'd shut away for years. One late afternoon, as the bookshelf neared completion, Sophia invited Lucas for a walk by Pine Hollow Lake. "You've worked all day. Take a break. I'll show you the best view in Haven Pines." Lucas meant to decline, but she grabbed his arm and pulled him out before he could protest. They walked along the shore, the water gleaming under the sunset, pine needles rustling beneath their feet. Sophia pointed into the distance, where a flock of ducks glided silently. "Beautiful, isn't it? I love sitting here every evening, just listening to the waves." Lucas followed her gaze, nodding. "Quiet," he said, his voice low. They sat on a large rock by the water's edge, Sophia bringing 2 cups of coffee she'd prepared. She handed him one, her fingers brushing his as he took it. Lucas felt the warmth of her touch, and for a fleeting moment, he wanted to hold her hand. But he pulled back quickly, gripping the cup to stifle the urge. Sophia didn't notice, or pretended not to, continuing to talk about the afternoons she'd spent dreaming there. "As a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, fly to Mars. But now I just want to be here, with the shop and this lake." Lucas watched her, his gaze softening at her smile. "My childhood didn't have dreams," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse. Sophia tilted her head, curious. "Really? Tell me." He hesitated, then spoke briefly. "My family was poor. My dad died early. I had to work young. No time to think about Mars." He stopped, unwilling to delve into the years that followed when he'd stepped into the underworld to survive. Sophia smiled gently. "And yet here you are, quieter than my dreams. Funny how that works." Their lakeside walks became a routine. They met after closing the shop, strolling by the water, talking about simple things, how strong or mild to brew coffee, which books were worth reading, or how Mr. Tom in town had just gotten a new dog. Their bond grew through subtle moments. Lucas's eyes gentled whenever Sophia laughed, his hand brushed hers when passing a cup, and he found himself standing a bit closer to shield her from the cold wind. Sophia sensed the shift but didn't push him to say it. She quietly savored their closeness. Yet Lucas always maintained an invisible line. Whenever Sophia probed deeper, "How long have you lived by the lake?" Or, "Where's your family?" He answered briefly, then changed the subject. He feared that if she knew the truth, that he'd once been a crime lord, that his hands had been stained with blood, that old enemies might be hunting him, she'd turn and run. He didn't want to ruin these peaceful days, didn't want her warm eyes to look at him with fear or distance. One evening as they sat by the lake, Sophia suddenly took his hand. "Lucas, I don't know much about you, but I like being around you. You don't have to tell me everything. I just want you to know that." Lucas stared at her small hand in his, a strange feeling rising, warm yet painful. He wanted to speak, to open up, but memories of the past, gunshots, blood, the scar on his chest, kept him silent. He squeezed her hand lightly, then let go, standing up. "It's late. Let's head back," he said, his voice hoarse. "Are you still following the stories from Soul Stories?" Share your thoughts and feelings about today's story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more meaningful and heartfelt stories from Soul Stories. Part 4. Unexpected Moment. The Kiss in the Nook. That evening, Haven Pines was shrouded in a thick fog, draping the small town in a cold gray cloak. Pine Brew coffee shop had closed, its faint golden light spilling weakly onto the pine needle-covered dirt road. Sophia Miller stood behind the counter, reviewing the day's ledger, while Lucas Kane helped her clean up, as had become his habit in recent days. He gathered chairs into the corner, swept the floor with steady motions, his strong hands working instinctively, as if it were the only way to keep his mind from drifting to dark memories. Outside the counter, Jake, The new employee Sophia had hired to help on weekends was wiping down the last table before heading home. At 19, Jake was tall and lanky, with tousled blonde hair, still awkward but eager. Sophia glanced at him, smiling faintly. "You did great, Jake. Be on time tomorrow, okay?" Jake nodded. "Yes, Miss Sophia. I'm heading out." He grabbed his jacket and was about to leave when the shop door suddenly swung open, the sharp jingle of the bell cutting through the quiet. Two unfamiliar men stepped inside, their menacing presence unmistakable. The taller one wore a black leather jacket, his eyes sharp and cold as a blade, hands in his pockets but clearly gripping something. The shorter one, bald, scanned the room with restless eyes. They didn't resemble Haven Pines locals, no trace of the friendliness or ease of regular customers. Jake froze near the door, startled, while Sophia looked up from her ledger, her smile fading. Lucas, sweeping in the corner, stopped, his eyes narrowing as he recognized them instantly. Henchmen from his old organization, sent to probe, to confirm if Lucas Kane was truly hiding here. The tall one approached Jake, his voice low and gravelly. "Shop's closed, huh?" "No problem, just got a quick question." He tilted his head, eyeing the employee with scrutiny. "You work here, so you must know the townsfolk, right? Any tall, quiet guy hanging around lately?" Jake hesitated, clutching the rag tightly, his voice shaky. I just started last week, don't know much. You could ask Miss Sophia, the owner." The bald one smirked, turning to his partner. "The owner? Let's ask her then." Lucas, hidden behind the newly built bookshelf, gripped the broom handle tighter, his heart racing. He knew if they spotted him, everything would unravel. Not just his identity exposed, but his connection to Sophia would draw their attention too. He couldn't let her get tangled up, couldn't let her become a target for those who'd sworn to make him pay. His eyes darted around the shop, landing on a small nook behind the counter. A storage space for old tools, just big enough for two, concealed by a wooden curtain Sophia used to hide odds and ends. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice low but firm, signaling her to come closer. She was stepping out from behind the counter, about to address the men, but Lucas's piercing gaze stopped her cold. Before she could process what was happening, he moved swiftly, grabbing her hand and pulling her back behind the counter. He slid the wooden curtain aside, ushering them both into the cramped nook, then closed it with a quick, quiet motion. Inside, the space was pitch black, reeking of old wood and machine oil. Sophia pressed against him, her shoulder touching his chest, her breath quickening in surprise. "Lucas, what?" she started, her voice trembling, but he pressed a finger to her lips, whispering, "Quiet, they can't see us." Outside, the two men advanced deeper into the shop. The tall one called out, his voice booming, "Where's the owner?" "Sophia, come out, we've got questions." He turned to Jake, still frozen near the door. "You said she's here. Where'd she go?" Jake stammered. She was just behind the counter. Maybe she stepped out." The bald one snorted, moving closer to the counter, his eyes skimming over the wooden curtain, but not lingering. "Sophia, anyone in here?" he shouted, his tone threatening. No response came, only a heavy silence blanketing the shop. Inside the nook, Lucas stood in front of Sophia, his hands on her shoulders to keep her still, his eyes locked on the men through a tiny slit in the curtain. He could feel her heart pounding beneath her thin shirt, her breath warm against his neck in the tight space. She trembled slightly but stayed silent, her gaze fixed on him, full of questions and fear. Lucas held her hand tighter, a silent reassurance, though he was tense too. If they checked behind the counter, there'd be no escape. The tall one waited a few seconds, then grunted. "Guess we got it wrong. No one's here." The bald one nodded, muttering, "If that guy's around, he'll show up eventually. Let's go." They turned, their heavy footsteps fading toward the door. Through the slit, Lucas watched their shadows disappear into the fog, the door slamming shut, leaving behind a weighty stillness. He exhaled but held his position, waiting a moment longer to ensure they wouldn't return. Still pressed against him in the nook, Sophia looked up at him in the dim light. Her face was mere inches from his, her warm breath brushing his lips. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. "Who were they?" Her eyes glimmered with a mix of worry and curiosity, her lips parting slightly as she spoke. The closeness was overwhelming, the confined space bringing their mouths nearly touching, and in that instant, Lucas felt a powerful surge of emotion. Not fear, not tension, but something he'd suppressed for days. He didn't answer, just gazed into her eyes, his own softening, losing their usual chill. Then, as if drawn by an irresistible pull, Lucas leaned down, pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle yet intense, a smoldering flame igniting after their days together. His lips were warm, meeting hers with a tenderness laced with longing, as if pouring out everything he couldn't say. Sophia froze for a second, stunned, then closed her eyes, kissing him back, her hands instinctively clutching his shirt. Their breaths mingled, hearts beating in sync during that brief blazing moment. When they parted, still in the nook, their faces flushed, breaths ragged. Sophia touched her lips, her voice shaky. Lucas. She didn't know what to say, her heart racing wildly. Lucas looked at her, his eyes flickering with unease but honesty. I don't know, he whispered, his voice rough. I just wanted to. He shifted back slightly, but the tight space kept him close, closer than ever. Sophia smiled faintly, her own emotions a tangled mess. So you don't hate me, right? She asked, half teasing, half serious. Lucas didn't reply immediately, just watched her for a long moment, then slowly pushed the curtain aside. The shop's golden light spilled in, illuminating their shy expressions. Let's get out, he said, his voice low. They're gone. He stepped out first, pulling her along, his hands still holding hers, though he didn't realize it. Back in the shop, Sophia brushed her hair back, trying to steady herself. Lucas, who were those guys? Why'd you hide from them? She asked, her gaze unwavering. Lucas turned away, his fist clenching as he fought his feelings. I don't want you mixed up in this, he replied, his voice hoarse. Lock up. I'm going. He headed to the door, but before leaving, he glanced back, a rare warmth in his eyes. I'll be back tomorrow, he said, then stepped out, leaving Sophia standing there, her hand on her lips, a smile she couldn't hide. Lucas walked back to his cabin, hands in pockets, his mind awash with emotions he couldn't name. That kiss wasn't to silence her. It was because he couldn't resist her closeness, something he never thought he'd allow himself to feel. He knew those men would return, but now he faced a greater danger, his own heart. The part ended with him by the lake, moonlight casting a conflicted glow on his face, while Sophia locked the shop, her heart brimming with a new, undeniable sensation. Part 5. Facing the Past. The morning after the kiss in the nook, Haven Pines awoke to a chilly autumn day, the sky a dull gray, as if foreshadowing something ominous. Lucas Kane stood by Pine Hollow Lake, holding a mug of cold coffee, his eyes gazing distantly at the still water. He had barely slept the night before, his mind reeling with images of the two strangers in the coffee shop and the sensation of Sophia's lips on his. He knew they were enforcers from his old organization, sent to probe, and if they returned, he couldn't keep running forever. But what unsettled him most was Sophia. She had entered his life, and now he couldn't let her be dragged into the darkness he'd tried so hard to bury. At Pine Brew, Sophia opened the shop as usual, but her heart was no longer at peace. She wiped the counter, brewed coffee, and chatted with regulars, but her eyes kept darting to the door, torn between hope and worry that Lucas would appear. The kiss last night wasn't just a fleeting impulse. It had awakened something deep within her, a bond she couldn't deny. Yet it came with questions. Who were those men? Why did Lucas hide from them? And why did his eyes hold such anxiety when he left? Lucas arrived at the shop around midday, when the crowd had thinned. He stepped inside, his cap pulled low over half his face, his demeanor as guarded as ever. Sophia saw him, a smile flickering across her lips, but she quickly sensed he wasn't there to work as usual. He stood behind the counter, keeping some distance, his voice low. We need to talk. Sophia nodded, signaling Jake, the new employee, to mind the shop, then led Lucas to a quiet corner near the bookshelf where they could speak privately. Lucas, what's going on? She asked, her gaze steady but gentle. Those guys yesterday, Who were they? Why are you afraid of them? Lucas looked at her, his hands clenching in his pockets, wrestling fiercely with himself. He wanted to keep her far from the truth, but after what had happened, he knew she deserved to hear part of it. He took a deep breath, his voice rough. I used to live in a dangerous world. People like them, they're from a past I left behind, but it seems it's not letting go of me that easily. Sophia froze, her eyes widening as she tried to process his words. A dangerous world? What do you mean? What did you do? Lucas turned his face away, his eyes heavy with burden. I did things no one would be proud of. I wasn't a good man, Sophia. Those guys, they could come back any time, and if they find out I'm here, they won't stop. He paused, unwilling to delve into the details. The years in the underworld, the blood-soaked deals, the enemies he'd faced. But he needed her to grasp the gravity of it. Sophia stayed silent for a moment, her hands gripping the table's edge to steady herself. Then she stepped forward, placing her hand on his, her voice trembling, but firm. I don't know everything about you, Lucas, but I believe you're not a bad person. If you were once like that, you've changed. I see it every day you're here. She squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with a resolve that caught him off guard and touched him deeply. I'm not afraid. I want to be with you, no matter what happens. Lucas stared at her, a mix of emotions swelling within. Warmth from her trust, but also worry because he knew she didn't fully understand what she was facing. You don't know what you're saying, he whispered, his voice hoarse. If they find me, you'll be in danger. But Sophia shook her head, refusing to let go of his hand. I'm not running away, Lucas. We'll face it together. Her determination, though naive, left him unable to argue, and deep down, he knew he didn't want to push her away. They devised a plan to avoid attention. Lucas decided to cut back on his appearances at the shop. He'd only come during quiet hours or after closing, steering clear of being seen there too often. Sophia agreed to keep things normal. She'd open the shop, chat with customers, and guide Jake as if nothing were amiss. They hoped that if the men returned, they'd see it as just a small, ordinary coffee shop with no ties to Lucas. But both knew it was only a temporary fix. His past wouldn't let go so easily. The following days passed in a quiet tension. Lucas came to the shop late at night, helping Sophia clean up, but he remained vigilant, his eyes frequently flicking to the door. Sophia tried to keep the mood light. She told him about regulars, about Jake spilling a tray of pastries, and sometimes they'd laugh together, though Lucas's smiles always carried a hint of weight. They didn't mention the kiss, but their closeness simmered beneath the surface, shown in accidental brushes of hands or silent glances they exchanged. Then one night, as Sophia locked the shop after her shift, a stranger appeared. He didn't enter, just stood under a street lamp a few yards away, his figure hazy in the fog. Sophia couldn't make out his face, but when she turned back to check the door, she noticed a small slip of paper wedged in the crack. Her hand shook as she picked it up and read, Kane, you can't hide forever. I know you're here. No signature, just scrawled handwriting and a chilling threat that sent a shiver down her spine. Sophia raced to Lucas's cabin at once, heedless of the late hour or thick fog. She pounded on the wooden door, her voice urgent. Lucas, open up! Something's happened. Lucas opened it, his eyes darkening instantly at the panic on her face. She thrust the note at him, breathless. I found this at the shop. Lucas, do they really know you're here? Lucas took the paper, his hand clenching it until it crumpled. He recognized the familiar scrawl, not from the two men before, but from someone higher up in the old organization. They weren't just probing anymore. They were certain. Lucas, tell me, Sophia grabbed his hand, her voice resolute despite trembling. What do they want from you? Lucas met her gaze, his eyes heavy, then finally spoke. They want me back, or dead. I was part of them, Sophia, a big part. When I left, I betrayed them, and they don't forgive that. He stopped, unwilling to let her know more about the killings, the bloody nights, but she'd heard enough to sense the danger. Sophia fell silent, but instead of pulling away, she stepped closer, wrapping her arms around him. I don't care who you used to be, she whispered, her voice choked. I only care about you now. We'll get through this together. Lucas stood still, feeling the warmth of her embrace, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Yet alongside that came a gnawing worry. He didn't want her hurt because of him. They sat at the small wooden table in his cabin, planning their next move. Lucas resolved to contact an old friend in the organization, not to return, but to negotiate a way out. Sophia suggested calling the police, but Lucas shook his head. The police can't help. This is my mess. I have to fix it. She disagreed, but eventually relented, as long as he promised not to face it alone. I'll be here, she said, gripping his hand tighter. Wherever you go, I'll be here. Part 6. The Final Decision. After the night he received the threatening note, Lucas Kane knew that running was no longer an option. He stood in the wooden cabin by Pine Hollow Lake, the dim glow of an oil lamp casting light on a face filled with resolve, but also weighed down by worry. The slip of paper bearing the words, "Kane, you can't hide forever," lay on the table, a challenge he couldn't ignore. He'd been on the run too long, and now with Sophia by his side, he couldn't let his past continue to threaten the life he was trying to build. It was time to end all grudges, even if it cost him his own life. Lucas sat down, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled out an old prepaid phone, the last relic from his days in the underworld. He dialed Vince, once his trusted right-hand man, now a figure the organization's boss relied on to hunt down traitors like him. It was Vince who'd sent the two men to Pine Brew the night before, and Lucas knew only he had the authority to stop this. The phone rang in the silence, each tone like a knife stabbing into his chest. Finally, Vince's raspy voice answered, "Kane? You're still alive and daring to call me?" Lucas didn't beat around the bush, his voice low but firm. "I want to meet. One last time. Haven Pines, east edge of the forest. Tomorrow. Just you and me." Vince gave a mocking laugh, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You think I'm dumb enough to come alone? The boss wants your head, Kane. The two guys we sent to that coffee shop already suspect something." Lucas gripped the phone tighter, his eyes cold. "If you don't come, I'll go straight to the boss myself. You know what I'm capable of. One last time, Vince. I want to end this." Vince fell silent, then finally agreed. "Fine, but you're a dead man if you try anything." The call ended, leaving Lucas in a heavy stillness. He knew it was a gamble, but he had to try, for Sophia, for himself. The next morning, Lucas left early, not telling Sophia about the meeting. He didn't want her to worry, didn't want her stepping into danger with him. He wore his old flannel jacket, a dagger tucked in his pocket, not for attack, but for defense. On his way to the eastern forest edge of Haven Pines, he passed Pine Brew, his gaze lingering on the small wooden sign he'd once helped Sophia repaint. He told himself, if I make it through today, I'll come back to her. But he also braced for the worst. The meeting took place in a sparse pine forest where fog still clung to the tall trees. Lucas stood waiting, hands in pockets, his gaze sharp as it had been in his kingpin days. Footsteps echoed from afar, and Vince emerged. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, clad in a worn leather jacket, his seasoned eyes scanning like a wolf's. He hadn't come alone as promised. Down the slope, a few hundred yards away, Lucas glimpsed the silhouettes of several henchmen waiting, guns at the ready. Vince had a fallback plan, but Lucas wasn't surprised. He knew the treachery of this world too well. "You've got guts, Kane," Vince said, his voice rough with a hint of mockery. "Calling me out here after betraying the boss. The two we sent to that coffee shop said there's a guy who looks like you there. You're good at hiding, but you've run out of road." Lucas stepped closer, keeping a safe distance, his voice steady. "I'm done with you all. I'm not going back, not threatening anyone. Leave Haven Pines alone. I just want to live quietly, Vince. That's it." Vince smirked, shaking his head. "You think it's that simple? The boss doesn't forgive traitors. Rules are rules. Come back or die. I don't want your blood on my hands, but I've got no choice." He reached for his waist, where a gun peeked from under his jacket, his eyes wavering as if weighing his options. Lucas stood still, his gaze unflinching. "You shoot me, Vince. You won't stay safe with the boss either. You know who I was. If I fight back, None of those guys down there will make it out. But I don't want blood anymore. I just want you to let me go." The tension between them was taut as a wire. Vince's hand tightened around the gun. His eyes conflicted. He'd once respected Lucas, seen him as a brother, but loyalty to the organization held him back from letting go easily. Lucas locked eyes with him, his voice dropping low. "You owe me one, Vince. That time I saved you in Chicago, you remember? I'm not asking for much. Just tell the boss I'm dead. Let me live, like a normal person." Vince went quiet, his gaze flickering between memory and the present. Then suddenly he drew his gun, raised it skyward, and fired a single shot. The blast echoed through the forest, startling birds into flight. Lucas didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on Vince. Below the ridge, the henchmen stirred, but Vince raised a hand to silence them. He lowered the gun, looking at Lucas with a complicated expression. "To me, you're dead from now on, Kane," he said, his voice rough. "I'll tell the boss I shot you, but if they find out you're still alive, don't blame me for not warning you." Lucas nodded, a trace of relief in his eyes. "Thanks, Vince," he said, his voice low. Vince didn't reply, just turned and walked into the fog, his figure fading among the pines. The sound of the henchman's footsteps receded down the hill, leaving Lucas alone in the quiet forest. He exhaled, the weight in his chest slowly lifting. He wasn't sure Vince would keep his word forever, but for now he'd won his freedom, not with blood, but with a fragile deal. As the sun climbed higher, Lucas returned to Haven Pines, weary but unburdened. He stepped into Pine Brew just as Sophia was clearing tables after the midday rush. She looked up, saw him, and her radiant smile quickly turned to concern when she noticed his tense, dirt-streaked face from the forest. "Lucas, where were you all morning?" she asked urgently, dropping the tray and rushing toward him. He didn't answer right away, gesturing her to the quiet corner by the bookshelf. Facing her, he took a deep breath, his voice low. "I met someone from the old organization. He's the one who sent those guys to the shop. I told him I'm done, I'm not going back, and he agreed to let me go." Sophia's eyes widened, her hands clutching his shirt. "Met them? Lucas, are you crazy? What if they'd shot you?" Her voice trembled with worry, but Lucas placed his hands on her shoulders, his gaze softer than ever. "I'm fine," he said, his voice rough. "He fired a shot into the air, told me I'm dead to them now. He'll tell the boss I'm gone. I'm exhausted, Sophia, but I'm relieved. I wanted to end this, for you." Sophia stared at him, her blue eyes glistening with tears, then suddenly threw her arms around him, holding tight as if afraid he'd vanish. "Whoever you used to be, I only need the Lucas I have now," she whispered, her voice choked. "Don't scare me like that again. You hear me?" Lucas stood still for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her, feeling her warmth seep into him. For the first time in years, he felt truly free, not just because of Vince, but because of her, the one who gave him a reason to keep going. They sat at a small table in the shop, hands still clasped. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "I was so scared, Lucas, but I don't want to lose you." Lucas squeezed her hand, looking out the window where Haven Pines remained peaceful as ever. "You won't lose me," he said, his voice steadier than it had ever been. "I ended it today. From now on, I want to build a future. With you, no more shadows." They dreamed together of the days ahead. Lucas would stay in Haven Pines living as an ordinary man, and Sophia decided to expand the coffee shop, not just for business, but to make it a place that bound them forever. They laughed together, the burden lifting from their shoulders for the first time, though both knew his past could resurface if Vince's word faltered. But now they had each other, and that was enough to face anything. Part 7. A New Happiness. After the confrontation with Vince, Lucas Kane and Sophia Miller embarked on a new chapter of their lives in Haven Pines. The pressure of the past slowly faded, though Lucas still occasionally startled at odd noises in the night. But with Sophia's steadfast presence and the tranquility of the small town, he resolved not to let fear rule him anymore. Together, they renovated Pine Brew Coffee Shop, transforming it into a warmer place, not just for business, but to build a home for a future they soon discovered would include a new member. Lucas spent weeks crafting outdoor wooden tables, placing them along the shore of Pine Hollow Lake, where customers could sit and watch the water shimmer. Sophia came up with the idea for a small bookshelf corner, but now she added a children's play area too, complete with wooden toy boxes and little drawing boards. They repainted the shop's walls a soft blue, hanging up landscape drawings by the town's children, a community bonding initiative. Not long after Pine Brew was finished, Sophia found out she was pregnant. When she told Lucas, he stood motionless, his eyes flickering between shock and joy. "A child?" he asked, his voice rough. Sophia nodded, beaming, and for the first time, Lucas hugged her tightly, as if afraid it were only a dream. The baby, a little girl named Lily, was born the following spring. With her mother's tousled brown hair and her father's deep blue eyes, Lily quickly became the center of their world. Lucas and Sophia embraced a simple life with her. Each morning, Lucas brewed coffee in the cabin's tiny kitchen, while Sophia carried Lily to the porch, singing lullabies as the lake lay shrouded in mist. They talked about small things, from cookie recipes for the shop to Lily learning to clap her hands. At night, they sat on the cabin porch, gazing at twinkling stars, Lily sleeping peacefully in Sophia's arms. And Lucas felt his heart swell with a joy he'd never known. Haven Pines gradually accepted Lucas as part of the community. Once the mysterious guy by the lake, he became a devoted father everyone adored. He fixed Mrs. Mary's roof, hauled firewood for Mr. Tom, and sometimes brought Lily along, letting her giggle with the town's kids. Sophia was the biggest bridge. She told everyone Lucas was a good man, and no one pried into his past. Stories about him became a buried secret, replaced by the image of a small family living quietly by the lake. 2 years after Lily's birth, on a spring morning, Lucas sat on the porch with the local newspaper, a rare read for him. He flipped through the pages absent-mindedly until a headline caught his eye. "Police bust major Chicago smuggling ring, dozens arrested." It was his old organization, the network he'd served and betrayed. The article reported that the big boss and many lieutenants had been caught, based on years of gathered evidence. There was no mention of Vince, but Lucas knew he was cunning enough to have escaped or stayed silent in jail about his death. He folded the paper, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from relief. His past was truly over. Sophia stepped out, holding Lily, and saw him sitting still with the paper. "Lucas, what's wrong?" she asked. He looked up, offering a rare smile, and pulled her to sit beside him. "They're done, Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse. "My old crew, the police took them down. We're really free." Sophia hugged him, Lily giggling between them, and from that day, Lucas walked lighter, a father and husband no longer haunted by his past. Years passed, and Lucas Kane and Sophia Miller, now gray-haired, remained as in love and at peace as ever. They still lived in the wooden cabin by Pine Hollow Lake, now expanded with a wider porch and a small garden bursting with vegetables they'd tended alongside Lily, their daughter now grown. Pine Brew had become a Haven Pines icon, not just a coffee shop, but a piece of the town's memory, where generations gathered and found warmth amid Oregon's cold days. Lucas, now over 60, retained his tall frame but moved more slowly. He enjoyed sitting on the porch's wooden chair, carving toys or reading, while Sophia, nearing 60, kept her radiant smile despite deepening wrinkles around her eyes. They no longer worked at Pine Brew daily. Lily, now 25, had taken over after earning a business degree. She modernized it with new coffee machines and a broader menu, yet preserved the bookshelf corner and lakeside tables her parents had created. Lucas and Sophia watched their daughter with pride, seeing in her a blend of his resilience and her mother's warmth. 2 years after the smuggling ring's collapse, their lives had fully shed the shadows. Lucas had shared his past with Lily when she was old enough to understand, not to boast, but to show her the value of the peace they had. She listened without fear, holding his hand and saying, "I'm proud you changed, Dad." Sophia sat beside them, smiling, and from then on they lived as a family unburdened by what once was. In their final years, they embraced a simple life by the lake. Mornings, Lucas picked vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, and mint. Sophia loved in her tea, while she brewed for them both. They sat on the wooden chairs, watching the lake glisten, talking about Lily, her boyfriend she'd brought home, or the grandchildren they hoped for someday. Afternoons they read together. Lucas still favored adventure novels. Sophia stuck with Jane Austen. Sometimes Lily visited, bringing pastries from the shop, and the three laughed and talked until dusk. The story closed on an autumn sunset, the sun staining Pine Hollow Lake red. Lucas and Sophia sat on their chairs, hands entwined, gazing outward. Lucas, his hair white, his eyes still bright when he looked at her. Sophia leaned on his shoulder, her smile soft as the day's last light. Lily stood in the distance, watching her parents from the porch, a warm smile on her face. "Did you ever think we'd have a family like this?" Sophia asked quietly. Lucas squeezed her hand, his voice rough. "No. But I'm glad we did." They fell silent, savoring the moment. A life healed and fulfilled, built from love, forgiveness, and Lily's laughter. The lake sparkled under the sunset, reflecting the elderly couple and their daughter's silhouette. Pine Brew glowed in the distance, a testament to the years they'd lived fully. And Haven Pines remained peaceful, embracing their little family, forever. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together. Hello, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Part 1. The Initial Relationship. Rain poured heavily on the narrow street, the golden light from the cafe spilling out through the misty glass, casting blurred streaks of brightness into the dark night. Elena Harper stood there, under the freezing downpour, clutching a gray umbrella tightly in her hand but not opening it. Rainwater streamed down her soft brown hair, soaking through her thin coat and drenching her white canvas shoes. But she didn't care. Her eyes were fixed on the scene inside the cafe, where Mason Bennett sat across from a stranger, a radiant smile on his lips. That smile, Elena had seen it hundreds of times over the past 10 years. It had appeared when he completed an outstanding design in college, when he secured his first contract for his architecture firm, and even when he shared trivial stories from his life with her. But now that smile wasn't for her. It belonged to the blonde girl sitting opposite him, who tilted her head and giggled, brushing her hair with a graceful gesture. Elena gripped the umbrella handle tighter, a sharp pang spreading through her chest like the cold raindrops falling onto her shoulders. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, the screen lighting up with a text from Mason. "Elena, where are you? I need your opinion on this gift. Does she like necklaces or earrings more?" She peered through the glass, seeing him holding a small red box, probably the gift he intended for that girl. Her fingers trembled as she typed a reply. "I'm busy, you decide." But just as she sent it, she heard familiar footsteps. Mason pushed open the cafe door and stepped out, his dark gray vest hugging his tall frame, his sharp brown eyes scanning the street. And then their gazes met through the rain. "Elena," his voice rang out, tinged with surprise and a hint of irritation. "What are you doing here?" She flinched, quickly turning her face away, scrambling for a lie. I was just passing by." Rainwater ran down her cheeks, mingling with something salty she didn't want to admit was tears. Mason frowned, stepping closer and pulling her under the cafe's awning. "You're so foolish, standing in this rain without cover. Look at you, you're soaked." He brushed the droplets off her shoulders, a familiar gesture he'd done hundreds of times before, but he didn't know, never knew, that she'd been standing there for over an hour just to catch one more glimpse of him, even from afar. She gave a faint smile, the forced one she'd practiced too many times in the mirror to hide her sadness. "I'm fine. Go back inside, don't keep her waiting." Mason shrugged, as carefree as ever. "It's done anyway. I'll drive you home, it's on the way." Without waiting for her response, he tugged her hand toward the car parked a few meters away. Elena let him lead her, her wet shoes leaving faint marks on the pavement. She told herself that as long as he was happy, she didn't need anything more. But how many times had she repeated that to herself? They first met on an autumn afternoon at university, exactly 10 years ago. Mason, then a second-year architecture student, was tall, handsome, but oddly clumsy. He dropped an entire stack of drawings onto the lecture hall floor, white sheets scattering amid the laughter of his classmates. Elena, the petite girl sitting at the back, quietly bent down to pick up each one, stacking them neatly before handing them to him. He looked at her, scratching his head awkwardly. "Thanks. What's your name?" "Elena," she replied softly. "It's nothing." From that moment, her heart no longer belonged to her. She didn't know what about him stirred her. Perhaps it was the sharp yet warm look in his eyes when he focused on drawing, or the way he stubbornly redid a design for the 10th time just to perfect it. She only knew that being near him made her feel more alive, even though he never saw her the way she saw him. They became friends, then best friends, at least in Mason's eyes. To him, Elena was the most reliable person, always there when he needed her, always listening, always helping without asking for anything in return. But for Elena, each day by his side was a small cut in her heart, deepening over the years. She vividly remembered a night 8 years ago when Mason had just failed a major design competition. He sat curled up on the sofa in her small apartment, holding the coffee she'd made, his eyes red from exhaustion. "I can't do anything right," he said, his voice hoarse. Elena sat beside him, silently taking a pencil and paper, sketching his idea anew, refining every tiny detail while he dozed off on her shoulder. By morning, she placed the finished drawing in front of him, smiling. "Try again." He looked at her, surprised, and said simply, "Thanks, Elena. You're my savior." But he didn't know she'd stayed up all night, not for the work, but for him. Another memory, more painful, was from 3 years ago, when she stood in the rain waiting for him. Mason had just broken up with his ex, a beautiful girl who betrayed him for someone else. He called her at midnight, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Can you pick me up? I don't want to go home alone." She drove across half the city in a torrential downpour, finding him huddled under an awning, an empty bottle rolling by his feet. She helped him into the car, letting him slump against her shoulder without a word, though the rain soaked through her clothes. All the way back, he mumbled about the pain of betrayal, never once asking how far she'd driven or why her hands were so cold. He just leaned on her, as if it were a habit. Elena Harper, 28, was a talented interior designer who brought warmth to any space she touched. She had soft brown hair, deep blue eyes like the sea, and a gentle smile everyone adored. But few knew that behind her radiant exterior was a heart full of scars. Scars she willingly bore for someone who never noticed her love. She sacrificed silently, not because she expected reciprocation, but because she couldn't imagine a life without Mason in it. Mason Bennett, 30, was the CEO of a prestigious architecture firm, a man so cold and rational he sometimes seemed distant. He was tall, with neat black hair and sharp brown eyes that could see through every detail, except Elena's heart. He didn't believe in love, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. 5 years ago, his ex-fiancée had left him right before their wedding for someone wealthier. Since then, he'd built a wall around himself, letting only Elena, his best friend, pass through without knocking. But he didn't know that each time she did, she left a piece of her heart behind that wall. On the drive home after that rainy evening, the silence between them was stifling. Mason drove, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, occasionally glancing at Elena, who sat huddled in the passenger seat. Her wet coat dripped onto the car floor, but she said nothing, just stared out the window where raindrops slid down the glass. "I think she's pretty interesting," Mason suddenly said, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. "That girl earlier, she works in fashion, talks funny too, but I'm not sure if I should see her again. What do you think?" Elena bit her lip, trying to keep her voice steady. "Up to you. If you like her, go ahead." She faked a yawn, hiding the eyes misting over with a familiar feeling, the sensation of being left behind. Mason chuckled softly, oblivious to the subtle shift in her tone. You're always like that, never giving me a straight opinion. But you're the one I trust most. I'd be lost without you." She didn't reply, just offered a faint smile, her hand gripping the edge of her coat. Those words, she'd heard them so many times. They were sweet like honey, yet bitter like medicine, because they never carried the meaning she longed for. The car stopped in front of Elena's apartment. She reached for the door, but Mason suddenly spoke. "Tomorrow I've got an important company party. The partners keep trying to set me up with their daughter. It's driving me crazy. Come with me, okay? I need someone I can count on." Elena turned back, looking into his eyes. Those eyes, as always, held no flicker of emotion beyond pure trust. She knew agreeing meant stepping into another wound, playing the fake girlfriend, standing by him but never truly his. But she couldn't refuse. She never could. "Sure," she nodded, her voice a soft whisper. "What time will you pick me up?" 7 p.m. Mason grinned, pleased. "Thanks, Elena. I knew I could count on you." She stepped out of the car. The rain had stopped, but the cold clung to her. Watching Mason's car disappear into the darkness, she wondered, what would that party bring? And why did he always need her, yet never truly see her? She stood there under the dim streetlight, her heart heavy with an unanswered question. Part 2. The Pretend Kiss. That evening, when the clock struck 7, Mason was already at Elena's apartment door, just as he'd promised in the car the day before. He rang the bell, standing there with a relaxed demeanor in a dark gray vest that hugged his tall frame, his black hair neatly combed. Elena opened the door, stepping out in an emerald green evening gown she'd chosen that morning, a color she knew he liked, though he'd never said it aloud. She'd spent the whole day preparing, not because she expected anything from this party, but because she wanted, just once, to stand beside him as someone truly special. But when Mason looked at her, he only nodded and smiled. "You look beautiful. Thanks for agreeing to come with me tonight." Elena forced a smile, her hand clutching the small clutch tightly. "It's nothing. You need me." The words were gentle, but in her heart they weighed heavy like a confession that would never be heard. They arrived at the Grand Lux Hotel, where Mason's company was holding its lavish party. The dazzling chandeliers cast light across the banquet hall, reflecting off wine glasses and silver cutlery. The soft sound of a piano blended with the lively chatter of the guests, businessmen, architects, and major partners. Mason led Elena inside, his hand resting lightly on her back, guiding her to the main table. "Remember," he whispered as they wove through the crowd, "just act like we're a couple. I don't want that old partner shoving his daughter at me." She nodded, her heart stinging when he said, "Just act like." She'd known this since yesterday, when he asked her to come along because he needed someone reliable. But knowing and accepting were two entirely different things. She wore a beautiful dress, held his arm, smiled at the guests' compliments. "You two make a great pair. She's a real gem, Mason." But each praise only deepened her pain. She wasn't his gem, wasn't his lover. She was just Elena, the best friend always there when he needed her. Mason, on the other hand, seemed at ease. He shook hands with partners, introduced her to everyone. "This is Elena, the most important person to me." He said it naturally, without hesitation, but didn't notice her eyes dimming. Important, but not in the way she dreamed of. She held a glass of wine, taking a small sip to hide her trembling hands, while he kept talking and laughing, as if her presence beside him was a given. The party continued in that pretense for a while, until the main doors swung open. A familiar figure stepped in, the sound of high heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, drawing many eyes. It was Sophia, Mason's ex, who had abandoned him 5 years ago right before their wedding to chase a richer man. She was as stunning as ever, her golden hair perfectly curled, her red lips curved in an arrogant smile. Sophia glided through the crowd, her gaze locking onto Mason like a cat spotting prey. "Mason Bennett," she said, her voice sweet but dripping with mockery. "Didn't expect to see you here. Still lonely as ever, huh? I thought you'd have found someone to fill the void I left by now." Elena felt Mason's body tense beside her. He gripped his wine glass tightly, his knuckles whitening, but his face retained its usual cold composure. "Sophia," he replied evenly, "I don't think you're in any position to talk about that." Sophia laughed loudly, her voice echoing over the background music. "Oh, don't be mad. I'm just surprised. Someone like you, rich, handsome, and still no one's caught your eye?" She tilted her head, her gaze sliding to Elena as if noticing her for the first time. "Oh, or is this little best friend still playing the substitute? How pitiful!" Her words hit Elena like a punch to the chest. She wanted to retort, to defend herself, but her throat tightened. Mason, however, couldn't take it any longer. He set his glass down on the table, pulled Elena close, his arm wrapping around her waist so naturally she couldn't react. "You're wrong," he said, his voice icy. "Elena isn't a substitute. She's my girlfriend." Sophia raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical, but before she could say more, Mason leaned down and pressed his lips to Elena's. The kiss came suddenly, strong and deeper than he'd intended. At first it was just a light touch, part of the act he'd staged to counter Sophia. But then his lips lingered longer, his breath mingling with hers, his hand tightening around her waist as if he didn't want to let go. The crowd fell silent for a few seconds, then erupted in applause, a few people whistling playfully. Elena froze. Her heart pounded wildly, blood rushing to her ears as if to drown out all sound. She felt the warmth of his lips, the familiar woody scent of his cologne, and for a fleeting, mad moment, she thought it was real, that he truly wanted her, truly loved her. But then he pulled away, turning to Sophia with a challenging look. "See?" he said, his tone casual, like he'd just closed a deal. "I'm not as lonely as you think." Sophia smirked, clearly caught off guard, but she quickly regained her haughty air. "Well played, Mason. I hope you two are happy." She turned on her heel, leaving the sound of her heels fading into the distance. Elena stood there, her lips still burning, her mind spinning. She looked up at Mason, hoping to catch something in his eyes, a spark of emotion, a sign that the kiss wasn't just pretend. But he only smiled lightly, patting her shoulder like a brother. "Just an act," he said, his voice gentle but cutting like a knife. "Thanks, Elena. You're the best." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she bit her lip, forcing them back. I'm going to get some water," she whispered, then turned and hurried away from the table, her heels unsteady on the floor. She found a secluded corner behind a large curtain where the lights didn't reach, and let the tears fall. She wiped them with the back of her hand, but they kept coming, unstoppable. That kiss, the moment she'd dreamed of for 10 years, was just a performance, and she was once again the fool on stage. From a distance, Mason caught a glimpse of her silhouette behind the curtain. He saw her head bowed, her shoulders trembling, and an unease crept into his chest. Why would she cry over that, he wondered, but then dismissed it. She's probably just tired, he told himself, turning back to chat with a partner as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, something stirred, a feeling he couldn't name. On the drive home, the air in the car was heavier than ever. Elena sat silently in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze distant out the window. Mason drove, glancing at her now and then, but unsure what to say. He felt unsettled, not because of Sophia, not because of the party, but because of her unusual silence, the way she avoided his eyes. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with a hint of worry. She nodded without turning. "I'm fine." But her voice quivered, and her eyes, though he couldn't see them, were clouded with tears she fought to hold back. Mason frowned. He didn't understand why she was like this. The kiss. He'd pulled it off perfectly, hadn't he? He'd saved them both from an awkward situation, and she'd agreed to help him yesterday. So why was she so distant? He wanted to ask, but he stayed quiet. He told himself it was just acting, that the lingering heat on his lips was just the after effect of wine and adrenaline. But deep down, he couldn't deny that the kiss felt unlike anything he'd experienced. Not like with Sophia, not like with anyone. It felt more real than he'd expected, and that confused him. When the car stopped in front of Elena's place, she opened the door and stepped out without another word. Mason called after her, "Sleep well, thanks for tonight." She only nodded, her small figure disappearing behind the apartment door. He sat in the car for a few more minutes, his hands still on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the closed door. He didn't know why, but for the first time in 10 years, he felt a strange emptiness as she walked away. Part 3. When Secret Love Becomes Pain. After the night of the party, Elena was no longer the Elena Mason once knew so well. That pretend kiss, though it lasted only a few seconds, had left a deep crack in her heart, not because it wasn't real, but because it felt so real to her, yet meant nothing to him. Mason's words, "just an act," echoed in her mind all night, like a verdict reminding her that her 10 years of unrequited love were nothing but a one-sided dream that would never come true. She lay in bed, staring at the blank white ceiling, and for the first time in years she asked herself, how much longer can I keep doing this? The next morning she stood before the mirror, gazing into her deep blue eyes now clouded from lack of sleep. She brushed back her brown hair, tying it up high, and made a decision. She needed to distance herself from Mason, not because she hated him, but because she needed to learn to love herself more than she chased after someone who never saw her. Her phone buzzed, his name lighting up the screen, but she didn't answer. She let it ring until it stopped, then sent a short message. "I'm busy with work for a few days, don't call me." As the text sent, she turned off her phone, feeling as though she'd just severed a part of herself. Mason, on the other end, sat in his spacious office, staring at the message with his brows tightly furrowed. "Busy with work?" he muttered, tapping his fingers on the desk. He wasn't used to Elena being so distant. For 10 years, she'd always been the one to answer his calls right away, always there whenever he needed her. He tried calling again, but all he heard was the long, empty tone. An uneasy feeling crept into his chest, as if he'd just lost something familiar he'd never paid attention to before. In the days that followed, Elena truly vanished from his life. She didn't show up at the usual cafe where they often met, didn't reply to his texts, and when he drove by her apartment one late evening, the windows were dark, not a single light on. He stood downstairs looking up, hands in his pockets, telling himself, she's probably really busy. But deep down, he began to feel a growing unease. Without Elena by his side, everything seemed strangely empty. He picked up his phone to text her something, but then deleted it. He didn't know what to say because he'd never had to think about keeping her close. She'd always been there, like an unquestioned part of his life. Meanwhile, Elena tried to build a new life for herself. She took on more interior design projects, working late into the night to leave no time to think about Mason. She told herself this was the only way to forget him, to stop her heart from aching every time she recalled that kiss. But each time her phone lit up with his name, she had to bite her lip to keep from crying. She didn't want to be away from him, but she couldn't stay near him anymore. Not when he only saw her as a friend, as someone reliable, not someone he loved. A week later, Mason unexpectedly saw Elena again at a meeting with a mutual client. She appeared in the conference room, dressed in an elegant gray suit, her hair tied up neatly, a gentle but distant smile on her lips. He sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her, but she didn't look at him, not once. She chatted with Mark, a new male colleague at the company, who had a friendly smile and eyes clearly drawn to her. They laughed and talked about a detail in the project, Elena tilting her head and nodding, looking more at ease than ever. Mason felt a hot surge run down his spine. He gripped the pen in his hand tightly, his eyes narrowing as he watched Mark pat Elena's shoulder in a friendly gesture. He didn't understand why he was so irritated. Who was Mark anyway? Just some ordinary colleague, nothing special. But when Elena smiled at him, a smile Mason had once thought was only for him, he couldn't take it anymore. The meeting ended, and as everyone left the room, Mason stood up, striding quickly to where Elena was gathering her papers. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her out into the hallway, his voice sharp. "Who's that guy?" Elena startled, looking up at him. Her deep blue eyes flashed with surprise, then quickly turned cold. "Who?" she asked, her tone flat. "The guy you were laughing with in there," Mason replied, still holding her wrist tightly, his gaze darkening with a feeling he couldn't name. She pulled her hand free, stepping back. "Mark, just a colleague. Why do you care?" Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of mockery in it. Mason frowned, the unease in his chest rising. I was just asking. Since when are you so close to him? Elena looked at him, her gaze colder than he'd ever seen. Just a friend, like you and me, she said, emphasizing the last words as if to stab at his heart. Then she turned and walked away without looking back, leaving him standing there, his chest heavy with a feeling he'd never experienced before. Jealousy. He returned to his office, slumping into his chair, rubbing his forehead. Like you and me, her words echoed in his mind. Why did that make him angry? Why did he care that she smiled at someone else? He told himself it was just because he was used to having her around, used to her presence in his life. But that reason wasn't enough to ease the restlessness gnawing at him. A few days later, an unexpected event pulled them both into a whirlwind of new emotions. Elena was working at an interior design site on the city's outskirts, a 2-story wooden house she'd designed herself. She stood on a ladder checking the ceiling details, when a wooden beam suddenly fell from the upper floor due to a mistake by the construction crew. She raised her arm to shield herself instinctively, but the beam struck her hard, knocking her off the ladder. A sharp crack sounded as she hit the floor, clutching her bleeding left arm, the pain so intense she couldn't move. The crew panicked, calling an ambulance, and one of them, someone who happened to know her connection to Mason, phoned him. Mason was in his office reviewing a blueprint when his phone rang. The caller spoke quickly. Elena had an accident at the site. She's badly hurt in the arm, being taken to St. Mary's Hospital. Mason dropped his pen, jumping to his feet, his face paling. What? How is she? He shouted into the phone, but the caller only said, Get there now, before hanging up. He rushed out of the office, not bothering to grab his coat, leapt into his car, and sped to the hospital. His heart pounded, his mind reeling with images of Elena lying motionless somewhere. He didn't know why he was so afraid, but the thought of losing her made it hard to breathe. When he reached the hospital, Elena was on an emergency bed, her left arm temporarily bandaged, her face pale from pain. He burst through the door, yelling at the doctor nearby. How is she? Why isn't anyone helping her right now? His voice boomed through the room, startling a few nurses. The doctor reassured him. She's fine, just a minor arm fracture and some cuts. We're waiting for an x-ray. But Mason didn't listen. He rushed to her bedside, sitting down beside her, his trembling hand touching her uninjured arm. How are you? Does it hurt a lot? He asked, his voice hoarse with worry. Elena opened her eyes, looking at him, surprised by his frantic expression. She gave a weak smile, trying to hide the pain. I'm okay. It's just a small accident. Mason said nothing, just bent down, grabbing a roll of gauze from the nearby tray and starting to bandage her cuts without waiting for a nurse. His movements were clumsy, his hands shaking so much he had to redo it twice, but he didn't stop. Elena watched him, her heart softening at this unexpected care, then asked in a whisper, Why do you care so much? Mason paused, looking up at her. His eyes were full of worry, but he couldn't answer. He wanted to say something, that he didn't know, that it was instinct, that he couldn't imagine what would happen if she weren't okay. But the words stuck in his throat. He just silently continued bandaging her arm, his gaze never leaving her pale face. When the doctor returned, Mason stood up but didn't leave. He stayed by the bed, watching as Elena was taken for an x-ray, his heart heavy. He didn't understand why he'd reacted so strongly, why the thought of losing her scared him more than anything in his life. He told himself it was just because she was his best friend. But deep inside, a small voice began to whisper that maybe, just maybe, she was more than that. Are you still following the stories from Soul Stories? Share your thoughts and feelings about today's story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more meaningful and heartfelt stories from Soul Stories. Part 4, Misunderstanding and Rift. After the accident at the construction site, Elena could no longer pretend everything was fine. The pretend kiss at the party, the distance she'd imposed on herself, and even Mason's worried gaze when he rushed to the hospital, all of it pierced her heart like knives, both sweet and painful. She lay in the hospital bed, her left arm wrapped in stark white bandages, staring out the window at the gray sky drifting silently by. Mason had stayed at the hospital all afternoon that day, sitting beside her without saying much, quietly checking every small detail, as if afraid she'd vanish if he looked away. But when she asked, "Why do you care so much?" and he didn't answer, she realized that his concern wasn't love, at least not the love she'd been waiting for over 10 years. She was discharged after 2 days, her arm still aching, but her spirit utterly drained. Mason offered to drive her home, but she declined, citing a need to rest alone. He looked at her, his brows furrowing as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he just nodded. "Rest well. Call me if you need anything." She gave a faint smile, turned, and walked away, her small figure disappearing behind the apartment door, leaving him standing there with an unnamed unease. Back home, Elena sat on the sofa, looking around the familiar room where she'd shared countless moments with Mason. The nights he came over to watch movies, the times he fell asleep on the chair while they worked together, the mornings she made coffee for him before he headed to the office. Now they were just faded memories, like dim streaks of light through a window pane. She realized she couldn't keep living like this, couldn't keep staying by his side, hoping one day he'd see her differently, when he only viewed her as a friend, a reliable person he could call anytime. She stood up, grabbed her laptop, and opened her email. A work assignment in Paris had just come in from a partner company, an opportunity to design the interior of a luxurious boutique hotel. It would last 3 months, long enough for her to leave this city, leave Mason, and perhaps leave behind the unrequited love that had held her captive for too long. She replied to the email, confirming her participation, then began packing. Each item she placed in her suitcase was a reminder to herself. This is for me, not for him. Before leaving, she sat at the table, took a sheet of paper and a pen. She wanted to leave a note for Mason, not to explain, but to close the chapter of the 10 years she'd given him. Her hand trembled as she wrote, tears falling and blurring some of the words, but she didn't stop. "Mason, for 10 years I've tried to be by your side, not because I wanted you to return my feelings, but because I couldn't imagine my life without you in it. I stood in the rain waiting for you, stayed up all night to help you, laughed when you were happy and cried when you were sad, all because I loved you, even though you never knew. But I'm tired, Mason. I can't keep looking at you the way you never look at me. I need to learn to live for myself, not chase a dream that isn't real. Thank you for all those years. Goodbye." She folded the letter, placed it in a white envelope, and left it on the kitchen table, where he often sat when he visited. She dragged her suitcase to the door, took one last look at the apartment, then stepped outside, locking the door without turning back. Her flight took off the next morning, carrying her to a distant place where she hoped she could rediscover herself. Mason didn't know Elena had left until 2 days later. He called her a few times after her discharge, but she didn't pick up, only replying with brief texts. "I'm fine, don't worry." He assumed she needed time to recover from the accident, so he didn't push. But on the 3rd day, when he drove to her apartment intending to bring some food, a bad feeling crept over him. The windows were dark, not a single light on, and when he rang the bell, no one answered. He used the spare key she'd once given him. "In case you need a place to crash," she'd said with a gentle smile, and stepped inside. The room felt oddly empty, devoid of her familiar footsteps, the faint coffee scent she often brewed. He called out, "Elena!" But only an echo replied. He walked into the kitchen, and that's when he saw the white envelope on the table. His hands shook as he opened it, his sharp brown eyes scanning each line. With every word she wrote, his heart felt like it was being squeezed. "For 10 years, I've tried to be by your side." He read, and images flooded back. Her standing in the rain, staying up all night to redraw his ruined designs, silently wiping tears after that pretend kiss, all replaying like a slow-motion film. "I loved you, even though you never knew." He paused, his breath catching in his throat. Loved him? Elena loved him? Since when? And why had he never noticed? When he reached the final word, "Goodbye," he dropped the letter onto the table, hands clutching his head, his face pale. He was stunned, feeling true fear for the first time, not of failing at work, not of betrayal like with Sophia, but of losing Elena forever. He shot to his feet, running through the apartment as if searching for some trace of her, but there was nothing but emptiness. She was gone, and he didn't know where. He sank onto the sofa, his hand instinctively picking up the white ceramic mug she used to use when visiting his place, the one she left behind after a late-night movie session. He gripped it tightly, as if it were the last piece of her left in his life. He sat there for hours, eyes fixed on the mug, memories flooding back. Memories he'd overlooked in his own carelessness. He recalled their first meeting at university, when she picked up his drawings with that gentle smile. He remembered the nights she sat by him, fixing every tiny detail in his botched designs without a single complaint. He remembered her standing in the rain to pick him up after Sophia left, her cold hands still holding him so he wouldn't feel alone. And he remembered the pretend kiss at the party, the softness of her lips, her breath mingling with his, and the way his heart raced, though he tried to ignore it. Since when did she become everything to me? He asked himself, his hoarse voice breaking the silence of the empty room. He didn't have an exact answer, but he knew she'd always been there, quietly filling the gaps in his life he hadn't noticed. He'd grown used to her presence, her smile, the fact that she was always the one he turned to when things went wrong. But now with her gone, he felt like he'd lost a part of himself. He stood, still clutching the mug, his eyes darkening with a new resolve. He couldn't let her go like this. He couldn't let her 10 years, and his own, end with a goodbye on paper. He fumbled for his phone, calling his assistant. "Find out where Elena Harper is. She just took a work assignment. I need to know now." His voice was firm, but his heart trembled with the fear that it might be too late. He sat back on the sofa, Elena's letter beside him, and told himself, "I'll find you, Elena. I can't lose you." But in his heart, a question lingered. Would he make it in time? Part 5. When secret love is no longer one-sided. Mason couldn't bear another minute after reading Elena's letter. That letter, with its trembling handwriting and ink smudged by tears, struck his heart like a knife, waking him from a 10-year dream of indifference. He had let her drift away, let her suffer alone, and now, with her no longer by his side, he realized she was everything he needed. He couldn't sit still, couldn't let her vanish from his life like a passing breeze. That very night, he called his assistant, his voice so urgent it nearly trembled. "Find out where Elena Harper is. She's on a work assignment, and I need to know exactly where, right now." His assistant, though startled by the unusual intensity in his tone, asked no questions and got to work immediately. A few hours later, the answer came. Elena was in Paris, working on an interior design project at the boutique hotel Le Clair de Lune, about 30 minutes' drive from the city center. Mason didn't hesitate. He rushed out of the apartment, heading to the airport with just a small backpack and Elena's letter, the one thing he clutched tightly as a reminder of what he'd lost. He booked the earliest flight, heedless of the cost or the chaotic work schedule piling up at the company. On the 10-hour flight, he didn't sleep, his gaze fixed on the window, where white clouds drifted by like memories of her. He recalled the time she stood in the rain waiting for him, her cold hand still holding him tight. He remembered her gentle smile when she picked up his drawings in college, and he remembered the pretend kiss at the party, the softness of her lips, her breath mingling with his, and the way his heart raced, though he tried to ignore it. "How foolish I've been," he muttered to himself, his hand gripping the letter until it crumpled. The plane landed in Paris as dusk was settling in, the fiery sunset painting the city in warm hues. Mason didn't rest. He rented a car and drove straight to the address his assistant had given him. He parked a few dozen meters from the site, not wanting her to notice him yet. Through the car window, he saw her. Elena stood amid a wooden house under construction, wearing a long gray coat, her brown hair tied up neatly, holding a design board and directing the workers. She tilted her head, smiling at a worker who asked her something, her eyes shining in the sunset, a beauty of strength and confidence he'd never noticed before. Mason sat silently in the car, his hands tightening on the steering wheel, his breathing heavy. She was no longer the small girl who always stood behind him, quietly sacrificing for his sake. She had changed, found her own strength in the distance he'd unwittingly forced upon her. He'd once thought she'd always be there, the steadfast best friend he could lean on. But now, seeing her in the Paris twilight, he realized how beautiful and precious she was, and how close he'd come to losing her forever. A mix of pride and pain welled up in his chest. He wondered, do I even deserve her after everything I've overlooked? He took a deep breath, opened the car door and stepped out. His shoes crunched on the dry ground, each step slow but resolute. Elena didn't see him, still engrossed in her work, her voice soft yet firm as she instructed the crew. This column needs to shift a bit to the left so more natural light can come in. Mason stopped a few meters away, his eyes never leaving her. He wanted to call her name, but his throat tightened, his heart pounding as if it might burst. Then she turned, perhaps from instinct, perhaps from the unfamiliar sound of footsteps. When her eyes met his, she froze. The design board nearly slipped from her hands, her deep blue eyes widening in shock. "Mason?" she whispered, her voice trembling, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. What are you doing here?" Mason didn't answer right away. He closed the distance in a few quick strides, pulling her into his arms before she could react. His arms wrapped tightly around her, as if he feared she'd dissolve if he let go. Elena stood still, her body stiff in his embrace, her breath catching from the suddenness. She felt his warmth, the familiar woody scent of his cologne, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming, like the dreams she'd had for 10 years where he finally saw her. He leaned down, whispering into her ear, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How long have you loved me?" The question pierced her heart like a gentle knife, carrying both pain and hope. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time in 10 years she saw something different. Not the usual indifference or coldness, but sincerity, anguish, and a fierce longing. She gave a sad smile, faint like the moonlight outside, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. "A long time," she replied, her voice so soft it nearly faded into the wind. "Since the day I picked up your drawings in college. But you don't need to know that, Mason. It doesn't matter anymore." Mason shook his head, his hands lifting her face, his thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "No, I need to know," he said, his voice firm yet trembling. "I need to know everything, Elena. I've been blind, so foolish that I didn't see you, didn't see your love for all these 10 years. I let you stand in the rain, let you cry alone, let you walk away from me without doing anything. But now I see, and I can't let you go anymore." Elena's eyes widened, tears falling faster, but she didn't look away. She wanted to believe him, but 10 years of pain had taught her to doubt. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice shaking like a plea. "Or is this just another time you need me to get you through something? Are you sure, Mason? Because I can't take another hurt." Mason didn't answer with words. He leaned down, pressing his lips to hers, this time not pretending. The kiss was slow, tender yet intense, as if he were pouring all the emotions he'd suppressed into it, regret for his years of obliviousness, the desperate need to keep her, in the love he'd only just recognized. Elena stood still, her breath blending with his, then slowly closed her eyes, her hands instinctively clutching his shirt, returning the kiss with everything she'd held back for a decade. Her tears fell, soaking into his shirt, but this time not from pain, but from joy. When he pulled away, he cradled her face in his hands, his gaze locked on hers. "I was a fool not to see it sooner," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I love you, Elena. I don't know when it started, but I know I can't live without you. I lost you once when you left, and I don't want to lose you again. Don't leave me anymore, please." Elena sobbed aloud, not from sadness, but because for the first time in 10 years, she felt his love, not through casual words or friendly gestures, but through his earnest eyes and the warmth of his embrace. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, but a smile finally bloomed on her lips, radiant like the moonlight outside. "I won't leave," she whispered, resting her head against his chest, listening to his heart beat strong and steady. Mason held her tighter, his hand stroking her hair gently, as if to make up for all the years he'd missed. Under the Paris sky turning to night, they stood there, two hearts finally beating as one after a long journey of hurt and hope. Elena's silent love was no longer unrequited. It had been returned, and this time it was forever. Part 6. A perfect ending. A year had passed since the day Mason found Elena in Paris, and in those 365 days their lives had changed in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. After that moment when he pulled her into his arms under the Parisian sunset sky, they didn't rush back home right away. Elena completed her project at Le Clair de Lune, but this time Mason stayed with her. He put his work at the architecture firm on hold, flying back and forth between Paris and their hometown just to be near her. He didn't want to waste another day making up for the 10 years he'd been oblivious. Those first months in Paris were a time for them to get to know each other again. Not as friends, but as lovers. Mason learned to see Elena with new eyes, noticing the small things he'd once overlooked. The way she furrowed her brow when focusing on a design, the way she giggled when he clumsily tried to make coffee, and the way her deep blue eyes lit up whenever he said, "I love you." Elena, in turn, learned to trust his love. She'd once feared it was just a fleeting impulse, that he'd soon revert to his old coldness. But with each passing day, he proved he was serious, through unexpected hand-holding, texts checking in during work hours, and nights sitting by her side, listening to her share dreams she'd once kept hidden. When the Paris project ended, they returned to their hometown together. Elena no longer lived in her old apartment, the one where she'd left her goodbye letter. Instead, she moved in with Mason in his spacious penthouse, which had a rooftop terrace overlooking the city. They turned that terrace into a shared space. Elena planted small potted plants, while Mason set up a long table where they worked late into the night. It was the same place they'd sat together in college, where Elena quietly sketched designs to help him without asking for anything, and now it became a symbol of their new beginning. Their life together wasn't always perfect. At times, Mason would unintentionally slip back into his old cold habits, and Elena had to remind him she was no longer just a best friend who silently endured. Sometimes Elena would wake startled in the middle of the night, dreaming he'd left her like in the past, and Mason would hold her tight, whispering, "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." But through each challenge, they learned to love each other more deeply, more honestly, and to cherish one another more. On a spring evening, exactly 1 year after Mason flew to Paris to find Elena, he decided it was time to turn their love into a forever promise. He planned to propose, not in a fancy restaurant or under the romantic Eiffel Tower, but on their rooftop terrace where it all began, where he'd once failed to see her, and now where he wanted to keep her forever. He prepared from early morning while Elena was busy at her design studio. Mason had his assistant bring strings of small lights, hanging them around the terrace like twinkling stars. He set up a small table in the center, draped it with a white cloth, and placed a bottle of her favorite wine there. In his vest pocket, he carefully kept a ring box containing a ring he'd chosen weeks ago with an emerald stone matching her eyes, and another special item, the old sketchbook she'd drawn for him in college. He'd kept it all these years, not for its work value, but because it was the first mark of the silent love he hadn't recognized. When Elena came home that evening, Mason met her at the door, his eyes shining unusually bright. "Come with me for a bit," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the terrace. Elena was surprised but smiled, letting him guide her without questions. When the terrace door opened, she stopped short. The lights glimmered like a starry night. The air carried the faint scent of flowers from her plants, and Mason stood there, in a simple black vest, but radiating a rare seriousness. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and delight. Mason didn't answer right away. He pulled her to the center of the terrace, where the lights illuminated her face, making her blue eyes sparkle more than ever. He took a deep breath, then knelt before her, his left hand holding the ring box, his right offering the worn sketchbook he'd kept all these years. "Elena," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I'm not good with fancy words, but I want you to know I've been wrong so much in the past. I didn't see you, didn't see your love, and I let you hurt for 10 years. But when you walked away, I realized you were everything to me. My friend, my savior from myself, and the person I love more than anything in the world." He opened the sketchbook, pointing to the rough sketches she'd made for him in college. "I kept this because it meant more than I ever realized," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "It was the start of us, even if I didn't know it then. And now, I want it to be a promise that I'll never let you go again." Elena stood silent, tears quietly welling up. She looked at the sketchbook, remembering the nights she sat by him, drawing every small detail just to see him smile. She hadn't known he'd kept it, hadn't imagined it meant anything to him like this. Mason opened the ring box, the emerald stone glinting under the lights. He took her hand, his voice trembling but resolute. "That pretend kiss wasn't pretend to me, Elena. From that moment, I didn't want to let you go, even though I was too foolish to realize it. I love you, and I want to spend my life proving it. Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stop. Elena looked at him, at the man who'd broken her heart for 10 years, but who now knelt before her with all the sincerity and love she'd once dreamed of. She burst into tears, but this time from happiness. She nodded, her voice choked. "Yes." Mason stood, pulling her into his arms, holding her tightly as if afraid she'd vanish. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her, a deep, sweet kiss. Not a pretense, not to prove anything, but to affirm they belonged to each other. Elena wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his chest, listening to his strong heartbeat, a rhythm she now knew was for her. They stood there, under the twinkling lights on the terrace, surrounded by her small plants and memories of the past 10 years. The city buzzed below, but for them, there was only the stillness of happiness. Mason whispered in her ear, "I'll never make you wait another second." Elena smiled, replying, "I believe you." Elena and Mason's journey wasn't just a story of love returned. It was a lesson in appreciation and awakening. Elena had spent 10 years loving silently, sacrificing without asking, but it was her choice to leave that made Mason see her worth. Her love wasn't weakness, but strength, the strength to wait, to hope, and finally to let go when needed. Mason, in turn, learned that love isn't a given. He'd been blind to Elena's presence, but loss taught him to look into his heart, to value what he'd once taken for granted. Their story reminds us that true love isn't just a feeling, but a choice to stay, to mend mistakes, and to build happiness from cracks. Elena and Mason had crossed misunderstandings, pain, and distance to find each other, and their perfect ending proved that love, when returned, can heal all wounds and turn dreams into reality. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.